The Panama Canal is operating at 40% reduced capacity due to historic drought. Water levels in Gatun Lake are so low that only 22 vessels per day can transit instead of the normal 38. Ships are waiting weeks in queue. Freight costs have tripled on some routes. 6% of global trade passes through this canal. And if the drought continues, supply chains break again. Right now, the Canal Authority is rationing water. Each ship transit uses 51 million gallons of fresh water. That water comes from Gatun Lake, which is fed by rainfall in the watershed. But rainfall in the Panama region has been below average for 3 consecutive years. The lake is at its lowest level since record-keeping began in 1903. The Panama Canal Authority published data in December 2024 showing that crossings dropped from 14,000 per year to 8,400. That's a 40% reduction. Container ships, LNG carriers, grain vessels, all delayed or rerouted. The economic impact is measured in billions. This crisis accelerated precisely when global supply chains were recovering from COVID disruptions and Red Sea shipping attacks. The probability of 3 major choke points, Suez, Red Sea, and Panama, all being disrupted simultaneously being coincidental approaches 0. This is the pattern of infrastructure vulnerability in an interconnected global economy. When critical nodes fail, the entire system suffers. The Panama Canal isn't just convenient, it's essential. The alternative routes add weeks and thousands of miles. And when shipping gets expensive and slow, inflation rises and economic growth slows. Ricorte Vasquez, administrator of the Panama Canal Authority, stated in November 2024, "We're managing the most severe water crisis in the canal's history. Climate change has fundamentally altered rainfall patterns. We can adapt with reservoirs and water management, but that takes years and billions in investment. The crisis is now." Even more alarming, climate models project that Panama will experience more frequent and severe droughts over the next decades. The canal was designed for a climate that no longer exists. Without massive infrastructure investment, capacity will remain constrained permanently. This isn't a temporary crisis, it's the new normal. The assumption that critical infrastructure designed a century ago can handle modern climate conditions broke completely when the canal that moves 6% of global trade can't get enough water to function. Here's what should terrify every supply chain manager and investor. The Panama Canal connects Asia manufacturing to US East Coast markets. It connects South American commodities to global buyers. It's the shortcut that makes global trade economically viable. When that shortcut closes, costs spike, and some trade becomes unprofitable. And this isn't just about Panama. It's about the fragility of globalization when climate, geopolitics, and infrastructure age all hit simultaneously. Think about that. Before we break down exactly how the canal works and why water is the limiting factor, what the drought means for shipping costs and delivery times, which industries are most affected by capacity restrictions, and why this is permanent infrastructure crisis, not temporary weather. If you want to understand how a century-old canal in a small country can break global supply chains and drive inflation worldwide, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because what we're revealing will change how you see supply chain risk and why betting on just-in-time global manufacturing is betting on infrastructure that's failing. Leave a comment. Should companies reroute permanently around Panama? Is climate change making globalization unsustainable? And what happens when the next major choke point fails? Let's start with how the Panama Canal actually works, because most people don't understand why water is the critical constraint. The canal is not sea level, it's elevated. Ships enter at sea level, are lifted 85 feet to Gatun Lake, transit the lake, then are lowered back to sea level on the other side. The lifting and lowering happens in locks. Ships enter a locked chamber, gates close. Water is pumped in to raise the ship or drained to lower it. Each lock cycle uses 51 million gallons of fresh water. That water comes from Gatun Lake and flows into the ocean. It's not recycled. Every ship transit permanently consumes 51 million gallons that can't be used again. Gatun Lake is fed by rainfall in the surrounding watershed. During rainy season, the lake fills. During dry season, it depletes. The system was designed assuming consistent rainfall that keeps the lake at adequate levels year-round. But rainfall patterns have changed. The rainy season is shorter and less intense. The dry season is longer and drier. El Niño events, which naturally reduce rainfall in Panama, are more frequent and severe. Climate change is fundamentally altering the hydrology the canal depends on. In 2023 and 2024, Rainfall was 30% below historical averages. Gatun Lake fell to levels that trigger operational restrictions. Below a certain depth, larger ships can't safely transit because their hulls might scrape the bottom. The Canal Authority responds by limiting how many ships can pass per day to conserve water. In normal conditions, 38 ships transit daily. During the 2023-2024 drought, this dropped to 22 ships. That's a 42% capacity reduction. Now you might think they could just let more ships through and accept lower water levels, but below critical depth, the canal becomes inoperable. If the lake drops too low, no ships can pass at all. So the authority rations capacity to stretch available water over time. This is a classic commons problem. Each additional ship benefits the shipping company, but the cost, depleting water, is shared by everyone. Without central rationing, the lake would empty and the canal would close completely. The Panama Canal Authority's solution in the short term is demand management. They auction transit slots. Shipping companies bid for priority. The highest bidders get through. Everyone else waits or reroutes. In September 2023, one shipping company paid $2.4 million for a single priority slot. That's 50 times the normal transit fee of $40,000. When companies are willing to pay that premium, you know the capacity constraint is severe. The long-term solution is increasing water supply. The Canal Authority is planning new reservoirs to capture more rainfall and reduce dependence on Gatun Lake alone. But these projects cost $5 billion and take 10 years to complete. The crisis is now. The solution is a decade away. Now let's talk about the economic impact, because 40% capacity reduction doesn't just delay ships. It breaks supply chains and drives costs up across industries. Start with container shipping. Container ships carrying goods from Asia to US East Coast have two route options. Through Panama Canal, 15,000 miles, 23 days. Around Cape Horn at the southern tip of South America, 19,000 miles, 35 days. The Panama route saves 12 days and 4,000 miles. That's less fuel, less crew time, less capital tied up in transit. In normal times, the canal saves approximately $3,000 per container in costs. But when the canal is congested, shipping lines face a choice. Wait in queue for weeks, which delays delivery and ties up the ship. Or reroute around Cape Horn, which adds 12 days and $3,000 per container. If you're shipping time-sensitive goods, electronics, fashion, perishables, you can't wait weeks, you reroute. That $3,000 cost gets passed to the buyer. For a container with $50,000 worth of goods, that's 6% added to the cost. That flows through to consumer prices. If you're shipping bulk commodities, grain, coal, ore, you might wait because the added time doesn't spoil the product, but the wait time ties up ships. If a ship sits in queue for 3 weeks, that's 3 weeks it can't be used for other routes. Effective capacity of the global fleet decreases. Charter rates increase. Those costs get passed through. Maersk, the world's largest container shipping company, reported in October 2024 that Panama Canal congestion added $800 million to their annual operating costs. They rerouted 15% of their trans-Pacific services around South America. Hapag-Lloyd, another major carrier, rerouted 20%. Mediterranean Shipping Company rerouted 10%. This is a structural shift, not temporary adjustment. And once shipping lines invest in rerouting, they don't immediately shift back when conditions improve. They need to see sustained capacity before committing to Panama again. So even if the drought ends, the canal might not return to full utilization for years. Now let's talk about specific industries affected, because it's not just generic shipping. Some industries are hit disproportionately hard. Liquefied natural gas is one of the most affected. LNG carriers are massive ships that require deep draft. They're exactly the type restricted when water levels are low. US Gulf Coast produces LNG for export to Asia. The Panama Canal is the route. When capacity is restricted, LNG exports are delayed. In 2023, 12 LNG carriers were forced to reroute around South America. Each rerouting adds $3 million in costs. That's $36 million just in direct shipping costs, plus the opportunity cost of delayed delivery. Japan and South Korea, major LNG importers, faced supply delays. Prices spiked. Energy costs increased. Industrial production was affected. All because water levels in a lake in Panama are too low. Grain exports from US Midwest to Asia are similarly affected. Grain is shipped by river to Gulf Coast ports, then by vessel to Asia. Panama Canal is the route. When capacity is restricted, grain vessels wait or reroute. US farmers get lower prices because shipping is more expensive, and Asian buyers have alternatives. In crop year 2023-2024, grain exports through Panama fell 28%. That's 40 million tons of grain rerouted or not shipped. US agricultural exports lost an estimated $2 billion in value. Automobiles and auto parts are affected. Japanese and Korean automakers ship vehicles to US East Coast through the canal. Components for US manufacturing come the same route. When shipments are delayed, production lines stop. Inventory costs increase. Vehicle prices rise. The automotive industry operates on just-in-time logistics. Parts arrive exactly when needed. No buffer inventory. This system is efficient when supply chains work. But when a key node like Panama has problems, the system collapses. Toyota reported in Q3 2024 that Panama Canal disruptions forced them to air freight $10 million worth of critical components to US plants to avoid production stoppages. Air freight costs 20 times ocean shipping. That cost either gets absorbed, reducing profit, or passed to consumers. Consumer goods from Asia to US East Coast are delayed. Retailers ordering inventory for holiday season face delays of 4 to 6 weeks. Either they order earlier, tying up capital longer, or they risk stockouts and lost sales. The cumulative economic impact is enormous. The Canal Authority estimates that capacity restrictions in 2023-2024 reduced global trade by $15 billion. That's direct impact. Indirect impacts, delayed production, lost sales, higher inventory costs, easily triple that number. Now let's talk about the geopolitical dimension, because Panama Canal disruptions give other countries leverage. China is building or financing alternative routes. Nicaragua Canal project, proposed for decades, got Chinese funding. The canal would cross Nicaragua, connecting Atlantic and Pacific, direct competitor to Panama. It's controversial, environmentally destructive, and might never be completed. But the fact that China is funding it shows they see Panama as unreliable. China is also investing in transcontinental rail. Belt and Road Initiative includes rail routes from Chinese ports across Central Asia to Europe. Slower than ocean shipping but faster than canal rerouting, and not vulnerable to water levels. China is building ports across Latin America. Chancay Port in Peru, opened November 2024, is designed to handle mega container ships. The strategy is to ship goods from Asia to Peru, transfer to smaller vessels or land transport across South America, then ship to Atlantic markets. Bypasses Panama entirely. Mexico is upgrading rail connections between Pacific and Gulf coasts. The Interoceanic Corridor project aims to move containers by rail across Mexico as alternative to canal transit. Not as efficient as the canal, but better than rerouting around South America. All these projects are being accelerated because Panama is unreliable. And once alternative infrastructure exists, it doesn't go away when Panama recovers. The canal loses market share permanently. This is the strategic problem. Infrastructure unreliability drives investment in alternatives. Those alternatives become competitors. Even when the original infrastructure is fixed, usage doesn't fully return. The Suez Canal faced this after the Ever Given blocked it in 2021. Shipping lines invested in alternative routes. When Suez reopened, some of that traffic never returned. Panama is facing the same dynamic. Every year of reduced capacity is a year shipping lines invest in alternatives, and the canal's market share erodes permanently. Now let's talk about the long-term solutions, because rationing capacity isn't sustainable. The Panama Canal Authority's primary plan is building new reservoirs. The Indio River Reservoir project would create a new water source for the canal. Estimated cost is $2 billion. Construction timeline is 8 to 10 years. A second reservoir, the Bayano project, would cost another $3 billion and take 12 years. Combined, these reservoirs would increase canal capacity by 30% and make it less vulnerable to drought. But there are problems. First, cost. $5 billion is a massive investment for Panama, a country with GDP of $75 billion. They need international financing. World Bank, Inter-American Development Bank, private investors. Negotiations are ongoing but not finalized. Second, environmental impact. Building reservoirs requires flooding areas that are currently rainforest or farmland. Indigenous communities would be displaced. Environmental groups are fighting the projects. Legal challenges are likely. Third, time. Even if funding and approvals happen quickly, construction takes a decade. The crisis is now. A reservoir completed in 2035 doesn't help in 2025. There are interim solutions. water-saving basins that recycle some of the water used in lock operations. This technology exists and is used in newer lock systems. The Panama Canal's older locks don't have it. Retrofitting would save 30% of water per transit. Cost is $1 billion. Timeline is 5 years. More efficient scheduling and vessel sizing restrictions, limiting transits to ships that use water most efficiently. This increases effective capacity without using more water. But shipping companies resist restrictions on vessel size, raising transit fees to reduce demand and fund infrastructure. The Canal Authority increased fees 20% in 2024, but too high fees in shipping lines permanently reroute. It's a delicate balance. Realistically, the canal will operate at reduced capacity for the next 5 to 10 years. New reservoirs won't come online until the mid-2030s. Water-saving measures can help at the margins. But the fundamental problem, climate change reducing rainfall, is not solvable at canal level. Now let's talk about the climate change aspect, because this is not just a local Panama issue. It's a preview of infrastructure failures globally. Climate models project that Panama's dry season will become drier and longer. Rainfall will be more concentrated in shorter periods. Total annual rainfall might not decrease dramatically, but the distribution will change. More intense storms, longer droughts. This is terrible for the canal. The system needs steady rainfall throughout the year. Intense storms cause flooding and runoff. The water rushes to the ocean before it can be stored. Long droughts deplete reserves faster than they can be replenished. Panama is not unique. Infrastructure globally is designed for historical climate patterns. Ports assume certain sea levels. Rivers assume certain flow rates. Rail lines assume certain temperature ranges. Airports assume certain wind patterns. All of these assumptions are breaking. Sea levels are rising. River flows are becoming more variable. Temperature extremes are increasing. Wind patterns are shifting. Infrastructure designed for the 20th century climate can't handle 21st century conditions. The Panama Canal is just the first major choke point to fail. Others will follow. The Rhine River in Europe, critical for cargo transport, has had multiple low-water episodes, making it impassable for large barges. The Mississippi River in the U.S. faced similar problems in 2022 and 2023, disrupting grain exports. The Mekong River in Southeast Asia, the Nile in Africa, the Yangtze in China, all experiencing changing flow patterns that disrupt transport and agriculture. This is systemic infrastructure climate risk, and the world is not prepared. Infrastructure investment globally is below what's needed to maintain existing systems, let alone adapt them to new climate conditions. The American Society of Civil Engineers estimates the U.S. infrastructure investment gap at $2.6 trillion. That's what's needed to repair and maintain existing infrastructure. Adapting to climate change would add trillions more. Globally, the investment gap is tens of trillions, and most countries can't afford it. Developing countries have the most vulnerable infrastructure and the least capacity to invest. So we're heading into a period of cascading infrastructure failures, not sudden collapse, but gradual degradation, more frequent disruptions, higher costs, lower reliability. And the Panama Canal is the leading indicator. Now let's talk about what companies should do, because supply chain strategies based on cheap, reliable global shipping are obsolete. First, diversification. Don't depend on a single route or single supplier. If you're shipping through Panama, have contingency routes mapped. Understand the costs and timelines for alternatives. Build relationships with carriers that operate multiple routes. Second, inventory buffers. Just-in-time logistics worked when supply chains were reliable. They're not anymore. Holding extra inventory costs money, but stockouts cost more. Companies need to accept higher inventory costs as insurance against disruptions. Third, nearshoring. Bringing production closer to end markets. If you serve U.S. customers, manufacture in North America or nearby Latin America. You're less dependent on transoceanic shipping. Panama Canal problems don't affect you. This is already happening. Nearshoring to Mexico has accelerated. Manufacturing investment in Mexico is at record levels. Companies are moving production out of Asia, not just because of geopolitical risk, but because of supply chain reliability. Fourth, contract flexibility. Long-term shipping contracts often lock you into specific routes and carriers. Build flexibility. Be able to shift routes if one becomes unreliable. This costs more upfront, but saves money when disruptions hit. Fifth, scenario planning. Model what happens if Panama Canal capacity drops another 20%, or if Suez closes again, or if Red Sea remains dangerous. Have plans for each scenario. Know your costs and timelines. The companies that adapt survive. The companies that assume the old system will return get crushed by competitors who adapted. Now let's talk about investment implications, because infrastructure failures create winners and losers. Shipping companies with diversified routes do better than those dependent on Panama. Maersk and MSC have global networks. They can reroute. Smaller regional carriers dependent on Panama-Asia routes struggle. Port operators on alternative routes benefit. Ports on the U.S. West Coast handling Asia cargo that used to go through Panama to East Coast. Mexican ports handling nearshoring cargo. Rotterdam and other European ports handling Europe-Asia trade that bypasses Suez disruptions. Rail and trucking companies benefit from nearshoring, moving goods overland in North America instead of shipping from Asia. Companies with resilient supply chains outperform. Apple has diversified manufacturing across multiple countries and has inventory buffers. They weather disruptions better than companies with lean supply chains and single-country sourcing. Commodities with disrupted transport routes see price volatility. LNG prices spiked when Panama capacity dropped. Grain prices became more volatile. Oil and coal similarly affected. Infrastructure investment becomes more attractive. Water management, reservoir construction, port expansion, all needed. Companies and funds investing in infrastructure will see returns as governments realize the crisis. Climate adaptation technology is an emerging sector. Water recycling, desalination, drought-resistant systems. Panama Canal needs these technologies. So do thousands of other infrastructure projects globally. The broader investment thesis is deglobalization. Globalization worked when shipping was cheap, reliable, and safe. It's becoming expensive, unreliable, and risky. Companies and countries that adapt to regional supply chains and local production will outperform those clinging to the old model. If this breakdown of how the Panama Canal works and why water is the constraint, what drought means for shipping costs and supply chains, which industries are most affected, and why this is permanent climate-driven infrastructure crisis changed how you see global trade and supply chain risk, hit that like button and subscribe. We're tracking every infrastructure choke point failure, every climate impact on trade, every sign that globalization is breaking down. Leave a comment. Should companies permanently reroute around Panama? Is climate change making global supply chains unsustainable? What happens when the next major choke point fails? Share this with anyone in logistics, supply chain, or anyone who thinks global trade is stable. After this, they'll understand why a drought in Panama can spike inflation globally and why infrastructure designed for 20th century climate can't handle 21st century conditions.